Somewhere, right now, someone is lying awake at 2 in the morning, replaying a conversation from 11 years ago, word for word, as if it happened this morning. Somewhere else, someone is looking in a mirror, still punishing themselves for a decision they made when they were a different, younger, less capable version of who they are now. Neither of them chose to keep carrying it. It simply never occurred to them that they were allowed to put it down. This is the longest, and in many ways, the heaviest episode in this series, because forgiveness is the one discipline almost nobody explains correctly. Most people think it means forgetting, or excusing, or reopening a door that should stay closed. It means none of those things. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what it does mean, and why the version of you still carrying something from years ago has been paying a debt that was never actually owed. The lie about forgiveness. Here is the most common misunderstanding, and it's the reason so many people refuse to even attempt forgiveness. They believe it means saying what happened was okay. It doesn't. Forgiveness is not a verdict on the other person's actions. It is not a statement that what they did was acceptable, or minor, or forgivable in the sense of not that bad. Some things people do to each other are genuinely serious, genuinely wrong, and forgiveness does not erase that truth or rewrite it into something softer. What forgiveness actually is a decision about what you are willing to keep carrying, regardless of what the other person did, deserves, or has ever acknowledged. It is possible to say, fully and without flinching, what happened was wrong, and, in the same breath, I am no longer willing to carry the weight of it. Those two things are not in conflict. Most people assume they are, and that false conflict is what keeps them stuck for years. Why we hold on. If holding a grudge causes so much pain, why does almost everyone do it anyway? Because holding on gives an illusion of control. Picture someone who was betrayed by a close friend. Every time they replay it, every time they rehearse the anger, the righteous case against the other person, there is a strange, bitter comfort in it. As long as they're still angry, it feels like the betrayal hasn't fully won. It feels like doing something, even though nothing is actually being done. Anger, in that sense, disguises itself as strength. It feels like refusing to be a victim. But there's a difference between refusing to be a victim and refusing to put the weight down. And most people, without realizing it, have confused the two for years. The grudge feels like a wall protecting them from being hurt again. In reality, it is usually a wall that has stopped keeping anything out and has only succeeded in keeping the person locked inside with the pain.
This isn't only an emotional cost, it's a practical one, and it's larger than most people admit. Picture someone who was wronged by a family member years ago. They no longer see that person often. The conflict is, in a sense, over. But every family gathering, every holiday, every mention of that person's name still costs them something. A tightening, a rehearsed resentment, a private rehearsal of every reason they were right to be hurt. They have, without meaning to, given that old conflict a permanent seat at every table they sit at since. The other person may have moved on entirely, unaware or unbothered. Meanwhile, the person still carrying the grudge is the only one still paying for it, over and over, in every present moment that gets quietly contaminated by a past one. This is the part almost nobody says clearly. Unforgiveness rarely punishes the person who caused the harm. It punishes, almost exclusively, the person still holding on to it. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. Here is where many people get stuck, and it's worth being precise about it because getting this wrong keeps people either in situations they shouldn't stay in or away from healing they're afraid to pursue. Forgiveness does not require reopening the relationship. It does not require trusting the person again, inviting them back into your life, or acting as though nothing happened. Picture someone who was deeply harmed by a former partner. Dishonesty, betrayal, real damage. They can fully forgive that person, in the sense of releasing their own need to keep carrying rage toward them, while also never speaking to them again, and being fully justified in that distance. Forgiveness happens inside the person doing the forgiving. Reconciliation requires two people, ongoing trust, and often evidence of real change. You are allowed to do the first without ever doing the second. Nobody is owed access to you simply because you've stopped hating them. Forgiving others, what it actually looks like. So what does it look like, concretely, to forgive someone else? Picture someone finally sitting with an old resentment, maybe toward a parent who failed them in some specific way growing up. For years, the story they told themselves was simple. They hurt me. They don't deserve my peace. At some point, they do something quietly difficult. They try to see that parent not only as the person who hurt me, but as a full, flawed human being. Someone who was likely shaped by their own unaddressed pain, limitations, and mistakes, long before this person existed to receive them. This does not excuse what happened. It does not mean the hurt wasn't real, but it allows something to shift. The anger stops being the only lens available, and slowly, the person finds they can think about that parent, even acknowledge the harm plainly, without it detonating something inside them every time. That shift, from detonation to simple acknowledgement, is what forgiveness of another person actually feels like from the inside. It is quiet. It rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens in stages, often over months or years, exactly like the patience discussed in an earlier episode of this series. The hardest kind, forgiving yourself. Everything said so far becomes harder, much harder, when the person who needs forgiving is you. Picture someone who made a serious mistake years ago, a decision that hurt someone they loved, a failure at a critical moment, something that, when they think about it even now, makes them wince. With another person, there is at least the option of distance. You can simply not think about them often. But you cannot get distance from yourself. You wake up inside the same mind every day, and if that mind has decided you don't deserve peace, there is nowhere to go to escape the sentence. This is why self-forgiveness is often the last and hardest form of this discipline that people attempt, and many never attempt it at all. They will extend understanding, context, and grace to every other person who has ever wronged someone, while reserving none of it for themselves. Self-forgiveness is not the same as excusing yourself. Just as with forgiving others, this needs a precise distinction, because getting it wrong causes real damage in both directions. Self-forgiveness does not mean deciding your mistake didn't matter, or wasn't your responsibility, or should have no consequences. Picture someone who hurt another person through their own carelessness or selfishness. If they immediately forgive themselves without any real reckoning, without genuinely sitting with what they did, and where possible, making it right, that isn't forgiveness. That's avoidance wearing forgiveness as a disguise. Real self-forgiveness follows accountability. It does not replace it. It sounds less like, "It wasn't a big deal," and much more like, "What I did was serious. I have done what I can to make it right, and continuing to punish myself further does not undo it or help anyone, including the person I hurt." The punishment, past a certain point,
stops being justice and starts being self-indulgence disguised as guilt, a way of feeling like a good person for suffering instead of actually doing the harder work of repair and change.
Forgiveness as a process, not an event. Nobody forgives anything, another person or themselves, in a single decisive moment that lasts forever afterward. This is one of the most common reasons people give up on forgiveness entirely. They try it once, feel the old anger return a week later, and conclude that it didn't work, or that they're simply not able to forgive. Picture someone who has decided, genuinely, to forgive an old friend who betrayed their trust. 3 weeks later, they hear that friend's name mentioned at a gathering, and the old anger flares right back up, sharp and immediate, as if nothing had changed. This does not mean the forgiveness failed. It means forgiveness, like almost everything else worth building, is not a single event, but a practice returned to repeatedly. Each time the old feeling resurfaces, the choice gets made again. I am still not willing to carry this. Over months, sometimes years, those moments of flare-up become less frequent and less intense. But expecting one clean decision to erase years of stored hurt in a single sitting sets people up to feel like failures at something that was never meant to work that way. What forgiveness does not require. To close the loop on all of this, it's worth being clear about everything forgiveness does not demand, because the myths around it are what keep people from attempting it at all. Forgiveness does not require the other person to apologize. Many of the people who most need forgiving will never apologize, never acknowledge what they did, and may not even remember it the way you do. Waiting for an apology that will never come is choosing to remain a hostage to someone else's willingness to give you something they may never give. Forgiveness does not require forgetting. The memory can, and often should, remain, as information, as a boundary, as wisdom about what to allow near you again in the future. Forgiveness does not require restored trust. Trust is earned back through consistent behavior over time, if it is earned back at all. Forgiveness can be complete while trust remains at zero, permanently, and that is not a contradiction. And forgiveness does not require you to minimize what happened. You are allowed to say, plainly, "That was serious, and it hurt me," and still choose to no longer carry it as a weight in your present life. The weight you put down. There is an old, simple way to think about all of this. Carrying resentment toward someone else or toward yourself is like walking for years with a stone in your bag that you never take out. You get used to the weight. It starts to feel normal, even necessary, as if the stone is somehow protecting you or proving something. But it was never protecting you. It was only ever slowing you down, tiring you out in ways you stopped noticing because you'd been carrying it so long. Putting it down does not mean pretending it was never there, or that carrying it made no sense at the time. It simply means, at some point, deciding you are allowed to stop. The practice, not the moment. Like everything else in this series, forgiveness is never completed in one dramatic act. It is built the same quiet way discipline, patience, and respect are built, in small, repeated choices that rarely feel significant on their own. The choice to see a parent as a full human being instead of only the source of an old wound. The choice to hold yourself accountable without sentencing yourself to permanent punishment. The choice, made again and again whenever the old anger resurfaces, to set the weight back down instead of picking it back up out of habit. None of it happens all at once, but it accumulates quietly into something that eventually looks, from the outside, like peace. Not because nothing painful ever happened, but because you finally allowed yourself to stop carrying it everywhere you go. That is the weight you put down. Not because it never mattered,
but because you decided, finally, that you were allowed to.